What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the show. Today's guest, Michael Santos, is the founder of Prison Professors, a nonprofit that he'll talk about as we go. He's an American prison consultant, author of several books about prison, professor of criminal justice, and advocate for criminal justice reform. He spent 26 years of a 40-year sentence inside 19 different United States federal prisons. I think it's 45 years, actually, that you were convicted of, or are sentenced to, I should say. During his decades of federal prison incarceration, he successfully transformed his life for the better by obtaining an education, getting married, writing several books, blogging, and working to prepare himself for a successful law-abiding life, even accumulating $1 million worth of assets while in prison. Unbelievable story. You're all in for a treat today. Michael, man, I really appreciate you being here.
Well, I appreciate you having me. This is super exciting. Thanks.
Absolutely. Let's start with, so you, if you go through your stuff, phrases like drug trafficking, kingpin, those phrases related to you at some point in your early life. Often, from what we see in childhood, those sort of things develop. It's a neglected childhood, maybe a split family, all this stuff. But yours wasn't quite that way. Do you want to talk a little bit about your initial upbringing, and then we'll lead into how you got into the narcotics trafficking game?
Yeah, I grew up in Lake Forest Park, which is a suburb of North Seattle. My father was a Cuban immigrant and came to the country with hopes of, building a better life for his family. And sadly, I didn't have the good character to follow in his solid work ethic. And by the time I was in high school, I was running around with a fast crowd. And that's when I started making bad decisions as a student, not really paying attention to education, really living kind of an entitled life with a group of, I would say, affluent kids. And by the time I was 20 or 19, I saw the movie Scarface came out. And instead of looking at that as an entertainment story, it led me into a series of bad decisions that put me in the crosshairs of law enforcement up until my arrest when I was 23 in 1987.
Unbelievable. At some point you talked a little bit like you had a fairly, a loving family and upbringing that doesn't support typically what you see of somebody who gets into the drug trade or whatever it might be, or ends up in 26 years of federal prison. But you did allude at one point to sort of the hypocrisy maybe of your upbringing around others that you saw as a kid doing things your parents said weren't good, and then like drugs and all that, but they dismissed it because of other character issues. I had that same thing with like going to Catholic church. On Wednesday, this guy's in the paper for a DWI, but he's and beating his wife, but he's the greatest guy in the world on Sunday because he has a suit on. So that hypocrisy really resonated with me. Do you see any of that as leading to more of like that material-based lifestyle that you went for and getting you into the narcotics game, or no? I'm curious.
I think that you tend to introspect a lot and look back when you faced a crisis in life. That was one of the things, when a person faces a crisis, hopefully that person is looking back at all the influences that led him to where he is. In my case, relatively early, after my arrest, I realized that I'd made a series of really bad decisions. And so that's where you start reflecting and say, well, how did I get here? What are the influences? I'm not really here only for selling cocaine. I'm really here because of the bad decisions I started to make when I was 12 or 11, because I was 23, right? So I was pretty young. And I'm locked inside of a jail cell and introspecting and thinking of all of the ways that made me justify what I was doing. I was selling cocaine to consenting adults. And this was before the war on drugs really took off. Ronald Reagan was in the White House at the time. And cocaine had somewhat of a glamorous thing. And I wasn't a substance abuser. I wasn't a drug addict or anything like that. I was just a greedy kid without the character to say, I need to focus on personal development to build a life of honor and dignity and contribution. I was looking for a fast road. And so I could, in my own, I think the wisdom of a young 20-year-old, the immaturity of a 20-year-old, I could justify and say, well, if it was okay. And I was involved in all kinds of scams when I was a kid. My father was a highway contractor, and I'd try to build his business by bid rigging and collusion and things of that sort, always looking for the fast route. And it really allowed me to justify what I was doing. and it put me, it exacerbated my problems because of the way that I structured it, so that I would never be around the cocaine. I'd hire other people to do it for me.
Yeah.
It resulted in me facing a much longer sentence than if I had done it myself.
Yeah, there was some naivete you speak to about like, well, I didn't touch it, so I'm not going to be in trouble for it. When that was the actual absolute opposite case. And I want to dive into some detail just to give folks a sense of what that lifestyle was and how you kind of transitioned. But one last piece I wanted, and this was for me, just as I read your stuff, I reflected as a father on my kids. I have a 7 and 4-year-old boy. And I think about you, right? You're being raised by this family, this, kind of traditional family like we have as well. And that that desire for a fast material life, if you will. I get concerned. I look at my kids who like, the toy or whatever. Like I place on them, like, I don't want them to have that materialistic mindset because it could lead to bad decisions. Maybe not as extravagant or whatever as what you went through, but still, I'm curious, looking back, you had a lot of time to reflect, just to a parent or to other people listening that are maybe parents who have young kids who say, oh my God, this is my worst nightmare. I understand that if the kid grew up in poverty and tried to get out and got into drugs, but this is a regular guy that grew up and did this and got a 45-year prison sentence. What, in any of your reflection, what do parents today need to be mindful of? How does a kid not become addicted to the material or addicted to the fast life? What is there any lessons you learned as you reflected back from your parents' parenting?
Yeah, some big lessons, and that is really starting out by really defining success, and having those conversations. And it's one of the areas that I really spend a lot of my time now, is helping people get clarity of thought and creating a value system by which we're going to live. So I mean, I don't have children. I was in prison, as a child, and didn't get out till I was 49 years old. But I do work with people in crisis, and that's one of the things that I always suggest is, none of us can change the past. None of us can, get a do-over, but we can always work to influence the future. And I think it's really important. If I were a parent, it would be helping my kids start defining success, and then talking about, what is important to you? What are the values by which you're going to live? And then create a real a plan, an engineered plan where you're setting very clear goals that align with what you set as success, and challenge them every day. And that's really what my focus has been since I've been home. That's how I've built my career, is helping people go through crisis and figure out, how do I emerge with my dignity intact as a contributing citizen? What is it that I want? Nobody wants to be a criminal, right? A lot of people want to be rich, but
Right.
they don't really go through all of the steps to say, how am I going to get there? And more importantly, how am I going to do it with my dignity intact and still live a life as a good citizen? So that's
Yeah.
the main thing that I learned, is that I really went down a bad path because I really never defined success. I was after something fast, immediate gratification, and not looking at, well, life is this long. Where are the decisions you're making today? Where are they likely to lead you? And I learned that I'd love to take credit for having designed that myself, but really I learned it from Socrates. And that's a
Yeah.
mentor that really had a big influence on my adjustment through prison.
I love your outline of the Socratic method, the questions you asked yourself when you were in prison early, and you're not even in prison yet, right? Still in jail when you asked them, and we're going to get to that. But let's talk about this lifestyle. So you go from, I watched Scarface, to now I'm a drug trafficker, essentially, right? Like, can you give us some detail? How does that happen? What were the steps? Where'd you get the money? Where were you? You were in Seattle? Were
So
you not? Go through all that.
yeah, yeah. So I grew up in a business family, an entrepreneurial family. My father was a contractor, and uh, really had high hopes for me as a Cuban immigrant. Wanted me to have things that he didn't have, and I worked by his side from the time I was 6 years old, and just didn't. I hated work. I hated that kind of work. By the time I graduated high school, he was a public works contractor and doing work for the city or the state of Washington, where I grew up. And I moved into the office segment and began really taking control of the company, um, just by using charisma and relationships. And as I said, I got involved in um, coordinating contracts for my father and growing the business. So I had access to his bank account, and I had his trust. and then I abused his trust. So what happened was, I think I was like 18. No, I was 20. I was 20 years old when that movie came out. And I just thought, wow, that's kind of cool. It looks, he's driving, I didn't really get the moral of the story. I wasn't a drug user, but at that time, you got to go back to 1984, 85, before the war on drugs, before the crack epidemic, before gangs were really proliferated throughout society. Cocaine had a sense of glamour, at least in my eyes. And I was living a fast life anyway, with a lot of affluent kids, and a lot of them used cocaine. And I just started doing my market research, kind of just asking, well, if you use cocaine, you must buy cocaine. What does it sell for? And so I got that price. And you must know somebody who buys in quantity. What's the price of it? And when I learned the price in Seattle, I started calling people that I knew in Miami, because my father escaped from Cuba, and their kids were my age. And they went to high school there. I said, well, if you went to high school in Miami, you must know somebody who sells cocaine. And of course, that's yes, they did. And so I said, well, what does a kilogram sell for over there? And that's how I learned. And so I said, there's a big spread. I think the price was like 25,000 in Miami, and in Seattle, it was like 50,000. So thinking that I could avoid the problem, I hired people to, for a few $1,000s, I'll give you a first class ticket to Miami. You got to stay in a hotel and just go pick up this cocaine and drive it back to Seattle. And, you'll make $5,000 or $10,000 or something like that. And that's how I started. So I took money from my dad's company to finance a transaction, put the money back in my dad's company. And that just led into a scalable problem of geometric proportions.
What were you making at the peak of this? Do you recall, like, what your annual income would look like?
Well, I was only in the scheme for like 18 months, right? But I made a few $1 million, which was a lot for in the mid 1980s for a 20-year-old. So I was, just living a fast, reckless life.
And you were in Miami, right? You moved to Miami at some point.
I moved to Key Biscayne, and I was arrested on Key Biscayne on August the 11th, 1987.
Yeah, it's incredible. If you, in reading your book, just going through bit by bit, you were married. Lisa, I think, was your wife at the time. And that entire story of being in your Porsche and going home and going through the gates for the last time, and all of that you talk about is just, you can feel it. You can, I've never been to prison, thank God, but I could just feel this stress. I told you I wanted to throw the book away. I was getting too stressed reading it, but it was really, really detailed. So how did you get, how did the DEA or whomever get onto you, if that makes any sense?
Well, that was the problem. Well, there was a lot of problems, but the big problem is the way I structured everything. I believed that if I didn't get caught with cocaine, if I didn't handle cocaine, if I didn't do it, I wasn't breaking the law. I didn't understand the law I didn't understand a lot of things, but I didn't understand that law. And so I hired people to do it for me, to pick it up, to deliver it, to do everything, thinking I was keeping my hands clean and just really acting as a financier and a deal maker. But those decisions put me in the category of being a kingpin under the statute. There's a statute in the federal code that's Title 18 USC Section 848. I think it's Title 18. It might be Title 21, but it says, if you manage 5 or more people, if you have 3 or more overt acts, and if you involve substantial amounts of money, you fall into this category of being a kingpin. And I didn't know what that was, but because I orchestrated it that way, where I hired people to transport it, store it, rent cars for me. I did all those kinds of things, and I really just oversaw it. I was a kingpin, and that exposed me to a sentence of life without the possibility of parole.
Did it matter this? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's just how I got exposed to such a very long sentence. And that's really was my downfall, was well, many areas, but the way I structured the organization put me at a much higher level of culpability.
Sure. How did you get found out that you were trafficking drugs?
Because I hired all of these people, they would interact with clients. And when clients got caught, a lot of times, these were all the same type of kids. They all came from business families that were involved with me, and they were not, hard criminals. They were just entitled kids. I mean, 20-year-olds. And all of us didn't see ourselves as criminals. So when the law came, it was traumatic for them, and they immediately started, oh my God, I'm in trouble. And they'd start, say, I confess, Michael got me into this. And so they would tell on me. And that's how I got caught, because other people got caught. They were where I was not involved in the day-to-day things, they were, and they would be transporting or something. And then somebody gets caught, somebody says something, and then, one person points at another, and enough people got caught and said that I was the leader. And that's how I got caught.
Now you moved to Spain, I think it was, for a bit during during the investigation, but eventually came back. Was that a good decision?
Well, I don't know that I made any good decisions between 20 and 23, but moving to Spain was really a not very well thought through effort to get away from problems that I'd created. A lot of people did get caught, and by then I'd learned that they were cooperating against me. And I thought that, it's simple, I'll just make a new start. And I went to Marbella and began building my life in Marbella. Then, you kind of, when you're away from America, you kind of miss America. And I start convincing myself, wait a minute, I didn't do anything wrong, and that's how I would say it. I didn't sell cocaine, they did. I'm not really recognizing the gravity of problems that I had created. I came back, and when I came back, I was arrested on August the 11th, 1987, a day I'll always remember.
Did you, I'm just curious, would Spain have eventually extradited you? Is that
if I got caught, I mean,
yeah.
I didn't go right to Spain. As I recall, I went to Mexico. Then from Mexico, I went to Canada. And from Canada, I went to Spain. And I was trying to live a new life. But yeah, I'm sure that I would have eventually got caught. There were a series of bad calculations that I had made. But one of them, if I had stayed in Spain, time going past would have probably worked in my favor if I'd stayed there for several years, because remember that their evidence against me was other people's testimony.
Right.
So after people got out of prison, they would have been less motivated to be talking about me. They didn't catch me with any money or any drugs or anything like that. So it was the primary evidence against me was people testifying. And that's certainly evidence, so I just didn't understand that when I was an adolescent. And I don't even know that you could say 23 is an adolescent. I mean, I was a young man, but it's very
the older you get, the younger that is, right? It's incredible how 20. Right. I can't believe anybody took me seriously at the age of 20 or 22.
When I was 23, I thought a 30-year-old was old.
Exactly. I say that all the time. At 23, 30 is old, and then you're 30 and you realize you're still 23, and then 40 seems old, but then it comes real quick. So absolutely. For you, when you got arrested, the day of your arrest, August the 11th, as you mentioned, 1987, can you take me through, or take us through, what that day was? Just step by step, as much detail you want to, as you want to give.
I mean, I know it really well. It was August the 11th. I believe it was a Wednesday. I went that morning. I was in a mortgage company's office trying to get a mortgage on a property that I owned to raise some capital. And I remember being in the lobby of that room, and you'd mentioned, you'd said her name was Lisa. Her real name was Gail. I changed people's names.
Got it.
But she made a phone call home, and there was a nanny there because she had children, and the nanny had said that there were police officers there, and I knew, when I just heard that there were police officers that wanted to talk to me, they weren't talking about a speeding ticket. Right. So I knew I was in trouble. And I remember driving then to an attorney's office that I had on retainer, and he made a phone call and said, yeah, you're under indictment. You're going to, they're going to arrest you. And he took off my Rolex. That was the last I saw of that watch, I think.
Yeah.
And he said, you better leave that here. And then he said, yes, go home. And I went home, and and I remember pulling in, and there was a gate there. The guy at the gate looked at me, and I could see the way that he looked at me. It was different.
Yeah.
And I pulled in, and I lived in a place called Key Colony on Key Biscayne in South Florida. and went to my apartment, and there were 3 people standing near the entrance of my unit. And they asked me, "Are you Michael Santos?" And I said, "I am." And then they drew their guns and pointed their guns at me. And that was the last time I was in Liberty until I walked out of prison on August the 12th, 2012.
Wow. Wow. On the way in the car to jail, I guess it would have been at that point, to being processed. They had mentioned, "Hey, give us your supplier," I think, right? "Give us your supplier and we take you home." Is that real? Is that something that actually could have happened? I
Oh,
know you
sure.
didn't make that decision, but what would have been if you made the decision in that moment, does all this go away? Does all that go, does that not
Well,
happen?
no, go away. No, no, it never. I mean, when you break the law, it doesn't go away. But if I would have chosen to cooperate, they would have taken me home and tried to induce me to bring people in, higher level people in, my suppliers or anybody else. If I would have cooperated, like the people did against me,
Right.
they lessened their offense by cooperating with the government. So had I cooperated with the government, they would have left me in the community. I probably would not have had a bond, and they would have dropped many of the severe charges that exposed me to life in prison, and likely would have given me a sentence of 5 to 6 years in prison, which is still
Yeah.
incomprehensible to somebody who's never been in the system. But it's far different from getting a 45-year sentence.
No doubt. No doubt. Um, okay. So you are in jail. What's your I mean, are you feeling as though this, yeah, I'm going to beat this? Like, what was your mindset, your
Yeah.
attitude at that point?
It was really foolish. I mean, I really thought that I could, I wanted to believe what my attorney told me. My attorney
Yeah.
had told me that there's a big difference between an indictment and a conviction. Turns out that's really not so accurate in the federal system. If the federal government targets somebody, there is a very strong likelihood of a conviction. And in my case, I was guilty. I was absolutely guilty of every charge they brought against me. And there were many charges, as I recall. There were like 30 counts on that indictment of drug trafficking and currency related offenses and racketeering and offenses that I didn't even understand what they were. But the big one was the Kingpin statute that exposed me to life. And my attorney told me, with the right amount of money, you could win. And I had some money. And I had enough arrogance to believe that I could beat it. So let's go. And I decided to go all the way. And instead of really trying to understand the situation and the gravity of problems that I'd created, I focused on, just doing what my attorney said. And I went through the trial. And while I was going through the trial, the scheme was ongoing because, I mean, I had a lot of people in place and they were all still working and paying me,
Right.
even while I was in custody. So, I was a young kid making every possible bad decision that a kid could make and really exacerbating my problems. So instead of trying to make things better, I went through trial, I committed perjury on the stand, and I was convicted of every count.
Wow.
And then indicted again while I was in prison for the ongoing stuff that was going on.
Crazy.
So it
Had
became a really difficult
had
challenge.
you turned on your suppliers, had you taken the deal and said, "Yeah, okay," I mean, look, your friends turning on you comes with, I'm assuming, very little risk. For them, there's a lot of reward. They can lessen their sentence, lessen their punishment. But now you're talking about, I would assume, turning on people that, potentially get violent. I mean, was that a calculation for you? Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there wasn't that kind of risk. Like, if you turned on your suppliers, do you become exposed to witness protection because of the level of violence you might face?
I think that I was never around the violent part of it. I've never had a gun. I've never had a weapon. I've never felt threatened. Um, I just, I don't know, obviously that's a possibility. I dealt with people that were, serious drug offenders, but I was party guy, you know.
Yeah.
I was just 20. I was a kid, and I was guilty. What could have happened? I don't know. I knew that I didn't want to do that, not because I was afraid of the violence, but because I knew that the problems that I'd created were my own, and I wanted to own them. And I trusted my attorney that said he could beat this, and it was a foolish decision. But my thoughts were, whatever happens, I'm going to reinvent my life as a good person. Whatever happens, if I win, I'm going to find a way to be a business person. If I lose, I'm going to change my life in prison. And I just had that mindset that I had to own whatever came, because I put myself in, and I wanted to work toward building a life of relevance and contribution and dignity. I just didn't make that decision soon enough. What I should have done is accepted responsibility. I didn't have to cooperate against anybody. I could have said, I did it. I was wrong. I want to make things right. And if I would have done that, I would have had a far different outcome.
You eventually end up in Atlanta at a federal penitentiary. And I mean, you know, the worst of the worst, right? Like the hardest of the hard type of places. This wasn't, you know, in the beginning of your sentence, at least, it was not a camp system or something medium secure. I mean, you were in a full-blooded federal penitentiary. You're 23, you're baby-faced, you know, you're new to this entire system. What was that? What did you face there? I'm assuming, I mean, were there fights? Was there, you know, attempts at, I don't know, raping you? I mean, I'm just kind of curious what you faced. I can't imagine as 23. I mean, if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening to your story, if you read your books, I can place me as you, other than the cocaine, right? Just a kid from a home trying to make a buck. Yeah, you value the material a little bit more maybe back then, and then boom, you're in a federal pen in the 80s, when you could picture the type of people that you're going to be surrounded by. And people made advances at you early, and even in jail before you got to prison. So what was that like? Did you avoid it all? Did you ever have to get in a fight? Did you ever have to defend your life? Did you have to stab anybody? Any of that stuff? I'm curious.
Yeah. So I was really fortunate in that while I was in jail, during that really awkward phase between the day that a jury convicted me of every count and the day that a judge sentenced me, I'd made a decision. I knew I was convicted. I was facing life in prison, and I knew I hated being in jail. I'd been in jail already for close to a year, and I hated it. And I was humiliated at what the disappointment I'd caused to my family. I was humiliated to be in this environment and see my name in the newspaper every day as a drug kingpin, and I wanted to be different. And so I was fortunate that a correctional officer gave me a book, and it taught me about my first exposure to Socrates, and it helped me change the way that I thought. And because it changed the way that I thought, I could put a plan in place, and that plan in place is what was going to get me through that journey. So now I could define success. I knew I'm going to serve a very long time in prison, but I always envisioned I'm going to get out of here with my dignity intact. I'm going to be able to put on a suit and tie and walk into any environment, and nobody will know I served a day in prison. And that's how I would define success. I'm going to come back as a person of relevance and a good person. So if you know how to define success, then you could take the next step and say, well, what do I have to do to get there? And that led me to this three-pronged plan that I really established before I transitioned from jail to prison. And that was, I have to think not about me, but I have to think about people like you and members of your audience, and say, what can I do while I'm here that would cause these people that I want to meet in the future to see me not as a drug dealer, but as, you know, somebody who responded to a bad situation well. And that led to this three-pronged plan. I'm going to focus on educating myself. I'm going to focus on contributing to society in meaningful, measurable ways. And I'm going to focus on building a support network. And if I can do that, I believed I could emerge from this successfully. And I didn't know what I was going to get. I hadn't been sentenced yet. So then I get sentenced. And when I got sentenced to 45 years, I had clarity. I had I couldn't even process that, or I didn't know what that meant. 45 years, I was 23. So I had no idea what that meant. Later, I learned that I could finish 45 years in 26 years, but I'm going to have to how to even process 26 years when you're 23. I haven't been alive that long, right? I mean, this is 2022. We're filming this, 26 years, that would be what, 2048. How do you stay focused till 2048 while living in a prison?
Mm.
So I had that definition of success. And then I knew I had to get an education. So as soon as I got to the penitentiary, I put a plan in place to start figuring out how to get to school. How do I become a student? And I'd been a terrible student up until that, in high school. I was a terrible student. I'd never read a book, I don't think, between the time I graduated high school and got to prison. But I started this path of saying, that's what I'm going to spend my first decade on. And so when you have that mindset of what you want, you can start making decisions accordingly. And I found my way to create a niche for myself in a high security penitentiary. And that path carried me through 9,500 days in prison without a single altercation with another prisoner.
Wow. Okay. I completely get what you just said. It's just amazing to me that nobody found it. Like, I just want to mess with this guy today, and he could, right? Like,
what happens is, I'm not going to say it couldn't happen, but I mean, it's a violent federal prison.
yeah.
And so, Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand before seek to be understood. So I went there understanding that I'm in a very dangerous environment here. And every decision I make is going to have an opportunity cost. It's going to have a position to advance me towards what I want to become or threaten my safety. And so I could find my way. And sometimes I think that, not to get spiritual, but when you're on this path, you can feel God kind of protecting you. And I was fortunate. I mean, the second I got there, I into the cell house, I met some guys from the mafia that were, accused of being in the mafia, and they really had a lot of influence in the prison, and they became friends of mine. And I knew other people in the prison because I was, a lot of people knew, I knew a lot of people, even in that high security penitentiary. So I was able to get through it without a single altercation, primarily because I developed good friendships with two guys who were well respected as organized crime figures, and to target me would have been an affront to them, and that would bring consequences. But then I also understood my place, so I would not participate in the types of activities that could, put me in the crosshairs. Then I found a good job in the prison, and then I volunteered in a place that kept me. I was in the penitentiary, but I wasn't of the penitentiary. I wasn't mixing and doing things. And I was really committed to fitness. And if somebody needed help with anything, there's a lot of people in prison that need help. There's a lot of illiterate people in prison. There's a lot of people in prison that have a hard time. And I was a person that would, help anybody. And I was blessed, I think, in that I got through some really difficult times that could have been very dangerous. But I think it all really comes from me not trying to be something that I wasn't. If I tried to pretend that I was a super gangster or super criminal, people would have tested that, But if I stayed away and tried to be, I used to use an analogy. I said, I'm going to be a submarine in here. I'm going to be under the current. I know I got my periscope up. I know what's going on around me, but I'm going to avoid the volatility as much as I can. And then, the days turn into weeks, the weeks turn into months, the months turn into years, and the years turn into decades. I went into prison as the youngest person in the penitentiary, and it didn't take long before I looked around and said, how did I become the oldest guy here?
Time flies even there, I guess, to some extent. But it's funny you say about every decision you made, you had to scrutinize. I remember reading about on the bus on the way there, sitting next to an older prisoner who got in a conversation with another prisoner, and that prisoner told you to get up. And what was interesting with the ultimate accountability in that moment, it sounded like you were like, well, I shouldn't have sat there in the first place. That's on me. That's the level. Like, you think about it in day-to-day life, be careful with the decisions you make. Yours came down to every move. Like, if I sit there, what's the potential consequence of doing so? Right. Like, you had to think in, 2, 3, 4 steps ahead, that's insane. Incredible.
Well, isn't that the same in business? It's the difference. I know that a lot of your audience are entrepreneurs, and some of them, you could use any business as an example, right? You drive down the road and you see Joe's Hamburgers, and it's got one stand, and three people working and they're doing pretty well, and you drive down the other road and you see McDonald's. What's the difference?
Yeah.
Right? What's the difference? It's that one person created a system and a plan, and he recognized how every decision comes with an opportunity cost, a SWOT analysis, and they figure that out. Well, that's what prison's like. It really conditions a person to realize we're accountable for our own actions, and we either create opportunities or we create excuses, and it's our choice. I didn't make excuses. I knew where I was. I knew it wasn't a place that I hated, and I knew that I wanted to come back. And I knew that when I came back, if I didn't create, I would have a brand new prison, a prison of unemployment or underemployment or lack of opportunity, or I could come back strong. And I knew that if I wanted the latter, every decision would become important.
The concept of tribe, right? Tribe millionaires, finding these two guys that you could link up with there just for the safety of your life. But I love what you talk about with the Socratic method, asking what's the avatar of the individual that I want to be around, and creating that before you knew who that person was, before there was a face on it, creating that avatar. I thought that was a really great Socratic type question. I love that. This question I'm struggling to ask, but I think you'll get where I'm going with it because you had a long time to reflect on
There's
this.
nothing you can't ask.
Well, no, I know, but it's an odd question potentially, or maybe you've been asked it a million times before, but your circumstances are what they are. You can't change it, right? You went to prison, you spent 26 years and you're out. Is there a sense that you had to go through this? Like, talk spiritually. Is there gratitude for having gone through this in any way, shape, or form because of where you are today and what you're working on? Like, in some weird way, is this, do you see this as a step? God, 26 years, a step on the path of your life's purpose, or is there full regret in all of it?
I have no regret. I mean, other than the bad decisions I made as a kid. I regret that I caused heartache to my mother and my father and disappointed my family and my community and the opportunities that I had. I regret that. But when I went to prison, I am very grateful that I had an opportunity to have an awakening, an epiphany. And that epiphany started with Socrates, reading the Republic. And then it led to reading about other people in struggle, and whether it was Mandela or Viktor Frankl or Gandhi, who told us to try and be the change that we want to see in the world. And that became a beacon for me that I could work toward. I want to be better, and I want to create meaning out of this and have an impact on the lives of others. And that clarity of thought over time. I mean, I forgot the name of that. Malcolm Gladwell wrote, it takes 10,000 hours to become a master of anything, an expert of anything. I was in prison for 10,000 days, so times 240,000 hours of focusing on this. And it really made a big difference on carving out my life and saying, I want to create opportunities while I am in prison that will help me contribute to the lives of others. And I was really fortunate in that those opportunities surfaced. I was able to get an undergraduate degree, a master's degree, become a published author, got married in prison, made money in prison, emerged with income opportunities. And all of that happened really because I read the Republic. And that's why I feel so passionately about trying to help other people in struggle realize everybody has the power within to make a better life.
Amazing. Today, I'm curious, given the time that you were convicted and sentenced, you mentioned it, war on drugs. I remember that. It was huge, right? Nancy Reagan, the whole nine, say no to drugs. Are you sentenced to 45 years for the crimes if they were committed today, same crimes they were committed today? From what I know you don't know, any judge could do whatever, but is it likely that you get the same sentence if they happen today?
Well, today, if somebody's going to federal prison, there's never a better time than today. I went to prison during the dawn of mass incarceration. And, I think society right now has moved in a different direction where it's recognizing this is a bad system. We sentence people, too many people to prison, and they serve sentences that are far too long. And the reforms that were taking place when I went to prison were all harsher. And, right now I got sentenced under a different sentencing law than exists today. During
Sure.
during the sentencing law that I got sentenced to in 1987, there has since been the implementation of the Comprehensive Crime Control Act, which brought in the federal sentencing guidelines. Those didn't apply to me. And there were other legislative and judicial opinions that case law that changed the system. So right now we're in an era where you're seeing a lot more reforms and recognizing the goal should not be to extinguish hope, but rather to prepare people for law-abiding, contributing lives upon release. So today's sentence, I would not have gotten 45 years because I would have been under the new law, but I also would not have received as much good time as I received. I did 26 years, which was every day of that sentence, because you got credit, not for, they call it good time, but it's really the avoidance of bad time. Everybody got it if you didn't get in trouble. I didn't get in trouble in prison. So I received all of the good time credits, which means that I served 26 years or 9,500 days. Today's sentence would be a little bit different. I probably, a person with a similar background today would probably receive somewhere around 20 years. And of that 20 years, if the person did everything right, the person would probably serve 10 to 12, which is still a very long time.
Sure.
But it would not have been what I served, I don't think.
Wow. Well, again, it is what it is. What happened is what happened. So take us forward now. So your level of security decreases as you've gone through your sentence, correct? You go to medium, you go to the camp system and so on. And I think you were released year 25 to a halfway house, right? So you served your last year sort of outside of prison, but still in a halfway house. What was that first day like being released? You were married, like you mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but tell me a bit about that first day. What was that like?
So I should preface this by helping. My business is really, I'm not a prison consultant. I own a business that they do that. I'm more in the nonprofit side.
Yeah.
But the difference was for me is I was ready. Most people sadly that serve long sentences or even short sentences have a really hard time adjusting. So I always like to say I'm not probably the typical example because I had $100,000 in the bank when I got out of prison. I had many income opportunities and I knew what I was going to do. I was deliberate. And so the funniest thing for me was, I knew what I was going to do, but there were some things that I didn't know. Like I didn't know I forgot how to drive.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know that I didn't know how to eat with silverware because in prison you don't touch metal, right? So you're used to plastic. Everything's plastic and little, and so I remember coming home and my wife, who we'd been married by then for 10 years, and it's Carol. We got married inside of a prison visiting room, and she's picking me up, and it was just really amazing because we'd been married for 10 years, but we'd never been together other than in a visiting room. So this is the first time I'm seeing her outside of a prison environment and holding her outside of a prison environment. And I remember that I had a very short window to get from prison to the halfway house. I had like 3 hours, and I was in the Central Valley of California, a place called Atwater. And I had to get to the city, San Francisco, and it was like 3 hours. And I think that's what they gave me, 3 hours. And, she had this technology that I'd never seen before, right? I went into prison, there was no email, there was no cell phones like there are today. And she was able to look, and she already could see that we were late. So we didn't have time. And there was an opportunity cost. If I got there late, I knew that I could lose privileges, such as the possibility to go to work, the possibility for home confinement, the possibility for home passes. So we had to rush to get there. And which was a bummer because, you've been married for 10 years, you want to do something more than just get to the prison, but we had to get there. So it wasn't the first day before she came. I told her I really wanted to have a pizza because I hadn't had a pizza in a long time. So she brought a pizza and she picked me up, and I'm just inhaling this pizza, and
How
I'm
good was
so
that
happy.
pizza?
It
How
was
good was that pizza?
amazing. It
Yeah.
was amazing. And so that was awesome. But she also gave me one of these things. I don't know if you've seen one of these things before, an iPhone. But she gave me this thing, and she said, "This is your iPhone," and I put it, I said, "This one's broken. There's no dial tone," because that's what I was used to in the real world. Right. And so it took me a while then, and I never, I'd read about the internet. I'd studied the internet. I had a web page for years, but I never experienced it. And so I was so excited to see the internet. What's the internet? How do I get to it? And so she was kind of teaching me as I'm driving, as she's driving. And then it wasn't only the first day though. Then I had to get a driver's license, and that's when I realized I didn't know how to drive anymore. And you never think you're going to forget how to drive. I didn't know when I forgot how to drive. I didn't know that I forgot how to drive. But when I got behind the wheel of a car, I realized, I don't know what I'm doing here. And I realized why. And here's the reason why. It's because when you're in prison, you never move faster than your legs can carry you.
Yeah.
So your eyes adjust it differently. So you're not used to the cars zooming by and your eyes can't process it.
Crazy. Yeah.
So that was really difficult for me to learn how to get that sense back. And it was difficult also for me to learn how to drink out of glasses, and ceramic instead of plastic. That took a few months before I got used to it.
Unbelievable. Now in prison, you wrote,
but other things were easy. Getting in the business world. I bought my first house within a couple of days of getting out of prison, which is a great story too.
It is a great story.
I started building my career right away.
Yeah, right in this book. I'm serious. People should pick this up. Success After Prison. There's some amazing stories, and Earning Freedom is great. And you have many others. And you wrote a bunch of these, well, not after prison, but you wrote some of these books in prison. You built a portfolio in prison. Walk me, like, this may be just like something I've heard, but I didn't think you could profit from your endeavors while in prison. How did you do that, if you did?
Oh, I definitely did. But for me, it was never about being a model inmate, right? It was always about being successful upon release. Define success. It's not to get out of prison and say, "Oh, I have no disciplinary infractions." That meant nothing to me. To come back to society strong, an ability to function, that meant the world to me. So I had mentioned earlier that I pursued an undergraduate degree and a master's degree, and I was in a PhD program. But it was the height of the war on drugs, the height of mass incarceration, and they blocked me from getting my PhD. So when they blocked me from getting my PhD, this is right at the dawn of the internet. This is like 1997, 98. And by then I'd been in prison for 10 years. Actually, it was early. I got my master's in 95. So it was like 96 or so. And I changed my focus to become an investor. And, at that time, the internet was considered by many people to be, a fantasy and not real, but I was studying the journal and Investors Business Daily and learning about the markets. And I really believed that the internet was going to change the world, and I wanted to own a piece of it. And I started purchasing stock in America Online and Yahoo. And those were the, that was the Google and Apple of the day. Back then, Apple was trading like, split adjusted, but probably 20 cents a share. It was $20, I remember, at the back then, because I remember looking at Apple, that Microsoft dominated. And anyway, I started investing and started using margin and leveraging my way. And before, just really got lucky in catching that wave of hyperbolic growth, and turn a few $1,000s that I'd earned from writing and publishing into more than $1 million in prison. And that was a phenomenal experience for me. Then, how did I do it? I went to the captain of the institution, and that's the person who runs security. And I told him, I said, you stopped me from getting my PhD. I want to invest. I want to start, investing in the market. And is that okay? And he said, "No, you can't do that while you're here." And I said, "What do you expect me to do? I've got 18 years left to go in prison. and I don't want to go home and have nothing. And I want to be a part of the community. And he said, well, buy a mutual fund. And I told him, I know 10 guys in this prison that are here for running mutual funds and scamming people. I don't want to do that. I think I can do it myself.
Right.
And he said, well, give power of attorney to somebody. So I said, you're saying then if I have my sister open an account, you'll allow me to tell her what to do? He said, as long as you're not pulling the trigger, you're okay. So we had CNBC in there. I became a big fan of CNBC and learned a great deal from watching, back then it was Mark Haynes and David Faber and what was that guy that's name? He's still on. I forgot his name now.
Jim Cramer?
Kramer was kind of not as big of a star as he was right now. Anyway, there's a lot of people there. Yeah. The blonde hair, Joe Kernan. Yeah. So I'd get up every morning, 4 a.m. I'd be watching the markets and learning and investing and calling my sister and telling her what to do, using margin and just leveraging a $2,000 investment, growing. Every time I'd get buying power, buy more, and caught the wave, and that's how I did it. That's how I made my first money in prison when I was in like my 12th year. And then the market imploded and I lost a lot of money. It was when I started to realize don't make decisions based on taxes, because I didn't want to sell. Although I'd made a fortune, I made it too fast. So I didn't want to pay short-term capital gains. So I either wanted to have $1.6 million, so I'd have an after-tax million if I pay the tax, or I needed to hold these assets for longer than a year. And the market imploded before that came through a year. So that $1 million in equity turned into a few $100,000 or something, but that still changed my life. So when that changed my life, I, sold everything when the market imploded and said, okay, I got to find something else. And that's what turned my attention to publishing. And I became an author and began writing books, first for academia, and wrote books for universities, and it helped me build remember, that was my goal, focus on education, focus on contributing to society, and focus on building a support network. So by then I had a very strong support network. I began publishing books that were used in universities, and that's how I developed my relationship with Carol. We fell in love and she became my partner, and she's still my partner. So we were married. We've been married for 20 years. And it all started inside of the prison visiting room. And then I used my money to help her, and she became a nurse. And that always with a plan. You would become a nurse, and I would continue writing and publishing. And then when I come home, I'll build a career around my journey. And that's what we've done. So I went to a halfway house in 2012. At that time, I'd still had like $100,000 in the bank. And she was in a master's program getting her nursing degree, and I started my career right from a halfway house.
You know what I love about stories? I say like yours. I mean, yours is very unique, but the redemption type story. So, do you know Andre Norman? Does that name ring a bell?
I don't know. Oh, wait a minute. I do. I do. He's an African-American guy?
Yeah. He was a federal inmate out of Boston for a number of years, and then got out, went to Harvard, won a fellowship from Harvard for kind of pretty much resolving the community versus police strife in Ferguson after the Michael Brown riots. And he's got a big brand now. So he's in a similar space as you.
Yeah, I have connected with him. I don't know, in some kind of way, but I do know him.
But that identity shift, right? That redemption story. And I had Michael Francis on this podcast, who was a former Colombo crime family boss, right? And same thing, goes from one life to the other. And the reason why I think that's so relevant is, like, for me, I went from a W-2 employee as an executive with an insurance company, and then decided I was going to leave that and become an entrepreneur. And that gap, that chasm, felt wider than, oh my God, it's the riskiest thing in the world. Crazy. How could you? You went from federal inmate to, full-on entrepreneur, right? Like, you went from drug kingpin by the statute to federal inmate to entrepreneur. And one of the things I think about in that chasm, going, especially in my role in real estate investing, going from W-2 employee over to entrepreneur or not employed, is people get nuts. Well, oh, but what about, I can't get financing like I can for a W-2 to buy a house, right? You came out of prison with zero credit, zero ability to buy, and you bought a $300,000 or $400,000 home days after you left prison, if I'm not mistaken, or within a year after you left prison, or whatever it was. But could you just share, like, how did you do that? How did you buy a house?
It doesn't, I think it's all about, visualize success from the very beginning, and the right decision at the wrong time is the wrong decision. So I didn't
Like that.
start planning to get out of prison, the day I got out of prison. I started years before, right? I didn't know when I was going to get it exactly, but I had a range. I knew that in 2010 I could start seeing, okay, you're going to get close. You should get out in 2012, maybe 2011, maybe mid 12. I didn't know, but so I started writing letters, right, to business leaders and cultivating relationships with people that I wanted to interact with, as we said earlier, those avatars. And I cultivated those relationships. And one of them was with a really successful business owner in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I would just write unsolicited letters. I'm in prison. I made a lot of bad decisions. And if that turns you off, no need to read further. But, this is what I did while I was in prison. This is what I want to do for you. I've read about you. I admire you. I'd love to have an opportunity to just work for you. If you give me an opportunity, I'll work for free for 2 weeks. And if I'm not the hardest working, most capable guy there, I'll shake your hand and thank you for the opportunity. But if you do find me worthy, I'd love to have an opportunity just to intern with you and learn with you. And that led to a lot of relationships. You send, lots of those letters out, and it's kind of unusual. I mean, you can see I get lots of these letters from people in prison every day because I write, right? And people are always doing that to me, right? Yep. So it's kind of unusual. You get a letter like this one that says FCI Fort Dix federal prison, right? You might open it. And that's what happened. So developed that relationship. Then I nurtured the relationship. So you got to find your own lead. Then I nurtured the lead and continued writing what I am doing. And then he'd offered me a job. And when he offered me a job, this guy was a really successful developer and business owner, and we developed a friendship during my last couple of years before I got out. And I think I was in the halfway house. I got to a halfway house on a Monday. By Wednesday, I had permission to go get my driver's license. By Friday, I had an opportunity to go see him for the first time. And so I went to the office and saw him, and he came to see me, and he told me he wanted me to work directly with him. And I said, I appreciate that, but this is just a stepping stone for me. I really want to build a career around my journey, and I want your help. And he said, I just tried to give you help. I tried to give you a job. and I said, well, yeah, but what I really want you to do is help me. He said, how do you want me to help you? I said, I want you to sell me a house. This is like my 4th day out of prison. And he saw after me and he said, do you have any money? And I said, I do have any money, but I don't want to use it because I need to use my money to start my life and my career. And he laughed and he said, so do you have any credit? And I said, I do. And by then I'd learned how to use my phone, and I went to Credit Karma, and I saw that I had a 000 credit score. And he said, look, I've got a 000 credit score. And he laughed just like you laughed. And he said, I've never seen that. And I said, well, I didn't exist before, and I said, but bad credit is worse than no credit. I've got no credit. And then I just told him, I said, Lee, you're a guy that's built many $1 million businesses. I mean, he had $1 billion business. And I said, you're a developer, you're a retail owner, you've got a rancher, you've got a lot of business. You sow a lot of seeds without expecting to see a result for years to come. I said, you've seen how hard I've worked in prison. I'm hungry. Don't look at me for who I am right now. I want you to see what I'm going to be in 5 years. And I want you to sell me a house. And he said, okay. He said, I tell you what, I'm going to sell you a house. I can't sell it cheap because it's going to ruin my comps. And it was a brand new house. He said, so 400 grand is the price, but he said, I'm going to get, I don't have to pay a commission. So I'm going to take that off and put that towards your down payment. And then he said, if you could stay that motivated while going through 26 years in prison, I want you to go talk to my team. And he had like 500 employees. So he said, I'm going to pay you $5 grand or something like that for every place you go talk to. And we'll apply that to the down payment. And then when you get credit, and I'll carry it interest only. And when you get credit, then you carry me out. And so that was how I started in real estate. And he's still my partner today, one of my closest friends. But that's how I started. And that's exactly what I tell people. I said, there's always a way to overcome a challenge, to overcome a struggle, but you've got to do a lot of work early to get ready for it.
Yeah. And you ask great questions. who are my avatars? And then you met your avatar with Lee, it sounds like, right? So I'm big on this, man. That power of community. That's why I love the community I belong to with this mastermind that we're part of here with GoBundance. But being around incredible people and investing in your network, to me, is the hedge against anything, any downturn, anything. If you've got the right people in your life, to me, that's the best hedge you can have. I want to talk about prison professors in a moment, but one just sort of final dangling thing that I had on here that I want to ask about. When you went to prison, prior to that, you mentioned about you were in your father's business. You had taken 100,000. I know you gave that back, but your parents were sort of no debt, run the business well, live a good life, and you scaled it. You did some of the other things that were maybe a bit more nefarious. So by the time you went to prison, their business at some point, maybe shortly thereafter, had collapsed. So there's a lot of wreckage I know that you had in your life. Were your parents, I don't even know, were they alive when you were released, or were they alive? Are they alive today, or were they alive long enough to see, this version of you that you became?
Unfortunately, they're not alive today. My father, I think it was just really devastated my father, what I had done. And he was so sad and scared for me.
Yeah.
And it just completely, it just sucked the life out of him. And fortunately, he did see me make this commitment to change my life and go to school. And but by the time, I think I was in my 8th year of prison, or 10th year, when he died. He contracted Alzheimer's very early. And yeah, he died, I think, when I was in my 8th year or so. But by then I'd gotten my master's degree, and he was so proud of me. And I was so grateful to try and show him that I was going to be better. My mother was with me, and she saw me become successful when I came home from prison, and build businesses and build a community. And she was, it was very grateful that she got to see that side of me. She contracted cancer, though, and died in 2017.
Wow.
But my grandmother, who's 101, is still with me, and I get to see her every week. So
She's 101. So I put you at what? You're 59 at this point,
I'm
no?
58 right now.
58. Wow. So she's 101. So everybody had kids young, I guess, right? When
I guess.
25-ish, sort of thing. So that's amazing. All right. Let's talk about prison professors. What are you seeking to accomplish? What is the vision, the mission, whatever you want to share about that not-for-profit?
Yeah, I create digital content for people in jail and prison. I mean, I think that mass incarceration is one of the great social injustices of our time. And there are many people that go to prison, and what I've seen is the longer you expose somebody to corrections, the less likely they are to emerge successfully. And so I think that's a big flaw in our system. And my goal is to try and help people in prison understand, or really all justice impacted people, whether somebody's under a government investigation, or going through a judicial process, or in prison, or coming out of prison. I want to give them the tools that they can use to transform their life, and to stop being a victim of past decisions, but rather empower themselves by thinking differently. So I create digital content that are either books or video, audio programs, and I distribute them. My clients are institutions, so Federal Bureau of Prisons, state prison systems across the country, and I create this content, and this is the way it traditionally it started as a regular for-profit, one of my for-profit businesses. Recently, I transitioned it into a nonprofit because I'm really striving to scale now to reach millions of people, and I'm very excited about it.
But the institutions are actually investing in this. So there's a commitment, it sounds like, to rehabilitation versus, I don't know, previously it didn't feel like it was always called rehabilitation, but it didn't feel like that was really the objective.
The agencies pay me a licensing fee for my
Yeah.
content, an annual licensing fee to receive it. And then they disseminate it to people in either their institutions or the entire system. So like California State Prison the whole system is a client of mine. So every state prison in California receives the prison professors programming, and people that go through it can even earn time credit off of their sentence. So I'm really striving to build that now. And I think there's a great opportunity with the way the system is changing. So I'm putting together a kind of a coalition of thought leaders and business people that are sponsoring it, because I can show them that this nonprofit's a little different. Many nonprofits are like always asking for money, but mine, I already, receive licensing fees in excess of 100 grand a year. And I think I can take that to about 2 million a year in 5 years. So I'm building this to get to that stage. And there are some investments that I have to make. And I think the better way of doing it is through a nonprofit where I can get high net worth people to participate and invest for the next 5 years to make an impact. So this is about really making an impact on society and resolving a great social injustice and intergenerational cycles of failure. And I'm very enthusiastic about it.
The objective on the back end, I think, makes so much sense. Rehabilitation, so people can be reintegrated into society and have a life, not feel the draw to go back. Because I know that's always been an issue for people coming out of the system. But is part of the objective as well, reform around sentencing guidelines, reducing the percentage of the population or the number of those that are incarcerated. Is that also an element of this?
So there's a lot of programs that focus on that side of it. Mass incarceration is a huge systemic problem, including what you just described. But to solve all of the problems is kind of like trying to boil the ocean. It's too big. Mass incarceration has been growing for more than 50 years, and it afflicts millions of people. There are collateral consequences. My area is very specific. I'm on a niche area where I want to help justice impacted people work to get a better outcome. Given, hey, the situation's unfair, the system's unfair, there's a lot of problems, there are many complications, succeed anyway. And that's what I teach people. I never ask anybody to do anything that I didn't do and that I'm not still doing today. And I document it and I show you this is a path that you can use as well.
Amazing. Wow, what a story. I so glad I found your story and was able to bring it to everybody that's listening today. Where do you want to direct folks, Michael? Where can people learn more about you or Prison Professors, wherever you want to send people?
Prison Professors has a platform everywhere, but the website really shows what I am doing. If it's okay, because I'm going to be sharing this with people in prison, is it okay if I ask you a couple of questions?
Of course. Yeah. Happy to.
So one of the things that I do is help people in prison see the authenticity that if you do develop really strong communication skills, good critical thinking skills, and an insane self-directed work ethic, you can overcome. And I'm curious about your group, Abundance. You said that it's a tribe of Go Abundance. It's a tribe of millionaires, and they're all successful entrepreneurs. And I want to let people in prison understand, hey, you're making decisions today that are either going to lead you to homelessness, to unemployment, underemployment, back to prison, or become successful. Yeah. And I always like to show them what does it mean success? So I'm very transparent about my business and how much my revenues are and how I earn and where I live and everything like that. I'd like to hear a little bit about your mastermind program. What do people pay to be a part of that?
So 10 to 15,000 annually to be a part of it. Plus you pay for different trips that we have.
And all of these people are already successful. They've already you said that the requirements are to have $1 million net worth. Is that right?
Correct. Financially successful. Correct. Yep.
And so the takeaway that I would have in there, and if I were in prison, is to ask yourself, who are you investing in? Are you investing in other people? Because a lot of people would say, they don't grasp the connection that I've got to continue investing in myself if I want to scale from 1 million to 10 million. And that's why people would join your group. All right. What's the takeaway that they're getting for spending 10 to 15K? They've already got $1 million business. What are they getting?
So the idea behind GoBundance that I love is that, wealth is the minimum requirement to get in, but the balance is across 6 different, what we call pillars, right? So you've got, yes, we want to build our wealth and we want to, build legacy wealth for us, for our families, all of that. But genuine contribution is a pillar. So it's something that we rally around. Like, how can we be the most contributory individuals we can be? Authentic relationships, adventure, health, accountability. Those are all the pillars that we sort of rally around. So as far as, I think you were asking, how do, we already have this business. What's the value or the benefit of being a part of this? One, it's to, and I say this to people all the time when they join, like, look, you're going to drop 10 grand, which isn't nothing. That's a good chunk of change. You're going to drop 10 grand to join a community. And then the best advice I can give you is go in not thinking, what do I get back for that 10 grand? But now I have access to amazing people. How can I best contribute to them? What can I give, right? What can I best give? So for me, when I go in, I think about my skill or superpower is I'm a really good connector. It's a natural inclination for me. So when I hear stories like yours or anybody else, I want to build your web. I want to help you build your web. I want to connect you to the guy that can help you with the thing if I'm not that guy. So I think what GoBundance does really well is it gives people a platform to go in, add value to others, and just understand that that's enough, and the value will return itself as a result of that. So for me, it's that. I also have the benefit of being in charge of our future millionaires communities, Emerge and Ascend. So I get to indirectly or directly mentor hundreds of people that are trying to find a level of success, not just financially, but in all those pillars. Like, yes, I want to be successful financially, but I don't want to isolate my family. I don't want to not be a contributing member of society. I want to do it all. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. And I think I hope that we're answering questions for people in prison who many times are thinking in terms of really short-term gratification. What's in it for me today?
Yeah.
But successful people think differently. They don't only say, I want to invest more and learn more in personal development. I want to read more books. I want to meet more people that are in different sectors and environments and learn what they're doing, and then take that information and apply it to our own life. And to the extent somebody's doing that, even if they're living in struggle, that person can build confidence, can build the skill set to overcome. And that's what I really hope people will see as I'm sitting here talking with you, a guy who surrounds himself with successful people. You might ask yourself, if you're sitting inside of a jail or a prison, who are you surrounding yourself with? Are the people that you're surrounding yourself with as committed as you are to being successful, or are they making decisions that are putting them in the crosshairs of problems and trouble? If you truly want to be successful, you got to do what we're learning from this tribe that you're describing. And that's what I really always like to emphasize, because some people don't see it, right? A lot of times people will say that I'm really lucky, and I'll say, yeah, I am lucky. The harder you work, the luckier you get. And I am lucky to be able to meet people like this and to leverage it and learn from them. And that's what I would encourage people in prison to do as well. Don't expect anybody to work as hard as you're willing to work for your success.
I love the phrase. It's cliche, but I think it's powerful. And it is, proximity is power, right? Proximity is power. Who you surround yourself with matters. And then with those folks, the more, like you did, you were safe in prison, or you gained safety in prison, in part, you said, because you contributed to others. You taught people how to read. You were in contribution, right? So you're surrounding yourself with the right people. You're looking for ways to add value to others. That's success. The monetary reward, or the whatever reward you're looking for, success is derived, I believe, from the right people and contributing to those people, which is honestly what I heard from your story as we talked.
I use this analogy that I'm sure you've heard before. So when's the best time to plant an oak tree?
Yeah. 20 years ago?
Exactly. And the second best time?
Today.
So that's something to say about it. Everybody could look back 20 years ago and say, what could I have done differently, 20 years ago that would have put me in a different position? And to the extent you think about that, regardless of what crisis you're going through, what challenge you're facing, you could say, well, what do I have to do today? But it's really not just, the analogy I use, I take it a little further in prison. I kind of develop it when I'm giving this presentation in prisons. I say, it's one thing to plant the seed, but is that all you have to do? Do you just have to plant a seed and it's going to grow into an oak tree, or do you have to do something more?
Yeah.
What else do you have to do?
You got to water it. You have to cultivate it. I don't know. I'm not
feed it, right? You got to feed it.
Yeah.
And what do you feed it with? What do you feed it with? Nurture it with fertilizer.
Fertilizer, sure. Yeah. And make sure it has direct sunlight.
What's fertilizer? What's it made of?
Poop.
Exactly. So you say, just use the analogy. You plant the seed, put fertilizer or poop over the fertilizer, right? And then it's got to grow through the poop. So be willing to grow through a lot of poop if you want to become successful. It's not just planting the seed. It's not just saying you want to be successful. You got to do everything within your power to make it happen.
I love it, man. Wow. Amazing. Wow. This is, I'm all fired up. I know you got to go. So Michael, man, thank you so much for being on. And I hope this adds value to your audience as well. So thanks again for everything you do, and hope to stay in touch.
Well, I'd love to stay in touch, but because many of the people are in jail and getting out, some of them in my audience, right? They're in prison. Some of them are serving multiple years or multiple decades. Some of them are in jail, getting out really soon. Could you also tell them how to find you and how do they become a member of a, I mean, they may not have $1 million, but maybe they want
Sure.
some mentoring to be a millionaire in the making. How would
100%.
they do that? What would they
Yeah.
do?
If they're getting on social media, at the Jamie Gruber on Instagram, that's me. And you can go to gobundanceemerge.com, GOBUNDANCE emerge.com, to look up an opportunity to join a tribe that doesn't require the Millionaire Net Worth, but teaches you goal setting, vision setting skills for you to get to where you're trying to get to, which, whether that's $1 million in net worth or being a millionaire in some other facet of life, the skills are the same. Have a vision, create goals, execute on great habits, have a plan, everything you talked about. And then proximity. That's really what the power of that community provides for. So yeah, I appreciate you asking.
And well, I'll put some show notes with this video so that people
Sure.
will be able to find you. And I just appreciate you for being so generous and allowing us to share this content with people in prison as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.